Welcome to the Ancestral Kitchen podcast with Alison, a European town dweller in central Italy, and Andrea, living on a newly created family farm in northwest Washington State, USA. Pull up a chair at the table and join us as we talk about eating, cooking, and living with ancient ancestral food wisdom in a modern world kitchen.
Hello everybody, welcome to, I'm so excited for this episode, more talking about sourdough, and we have an incredible guest here today, Elly, and I just cannot wait to ask her all the questions. So welcome Elly and welcome Alison.
Thank you. Hello. Thanks for having me.
This is so fun. We're on
3 ways.
We're on 3 continents in 3 time zones. I think just a moment of acknowledgement to Alison for figuring out what time we all needed to get on in our time zones.
I did it right.
I think you had to use calculus, didn't you? Some advanced math.
Yeah, I think so. It was algebra, everything.
Yeah. But here we are in 3 different countries, 3 different time zones, 3 different continents, 2 different hemispheres. So this is going to be really fun talking about sourdough bread. First off, I want to say before we jump into everything, I'm so excited. Alison and I have been working hard on the Patreon, especially Alison has been working on it. You guys, she's doing so much awesome work on it and setting it up, coming up with some verbiage and things like that. So I'm really excited to be able to share the Patreon with you all soon because you are asking, which I'm so grateful for, when can we do a Patreon? So I'm super stoked about that. And Alison and I just recorded our first Patreon episode for the super special other podcast that y'all get on the Patreon. So that was really fun, Alison. That was a good time for me.
Yeah, it was. I enjoyed it.
All right, so how we usually start out, Elly, is we talk about what our last meal was. And for Alison, it's usually breakfast because it's morning for her when we record. For me, it's usually dinner. And I actually don't know what it is for you. I think
lunch.
Lunch? Okay.
Yeah.
So we got all the meals here. So I'll start out asking Alison, what did you have? Or did you have breakfast yet, Alison?
No, I haven't had breakfast yet.
Okay.
No, I got up and I plonked myself on this seat and I'm here. But I can tell you what I'm going to have for breakfast.
Yeah, I want to hear it.
Yeah. So we made beer last week, and in the process of filtering the beer, we have 2 kind of grain sediments. One of them's the quite thick grains, which I use to bake bread. You can they're just roughly ground up grain, and I save those and I make bread with them. And then once we filtered that, we are still left with kind of like a flour consistency that's at the bottom of the drink, that is the thinner parts of the grain, like the white bits that have fallen off, and those stay in the beer, and then we pour the beer off and leave those at the bottom of the bottle. And then once we finish the beer, I get those bits out at the bottom of the bottle, sometimes with difficulty, and I make porridge out of them. And it is the most sour, most delightful porridge ever, really. And so when we've finished, I'm going to go upstairs and I'm going to have a porridge from the spelt bits that are left at the bottom of the beer, and I'll put my usual on it, which is miso and linseed and some crunchy nuts probably, and olive oil, and mix it all around. It's kind of a weird breakfast, but it's one of my favourites.
I'm sorry, you're having a beer porridge?
Yeah, breakfast.
I'm into this. I don't know what it is, but
don't
I'm
ever
into
call
it.
me weird. A beer porridge at breakfast.
Oh.
Yeah, I wish I could share.
Sounds
Yeah,
good.
me too.
Because it's quite apt for our episode today, being kind of a bread thing and a grain thing.
No,
and
it
a
is
fermenting thing.
Now bread and you. So you talked about this when we did the Patreon recording, and you read that passage from the book that I was like basically crying over. But bread and beer have always kind of gone together.
Yeah,
which
side
is
by
so
side.
fascinating.
And the recipe that I'm making is made with par-baked bread to hold the yeast.
Right.
So they are just historically have been paired and made together, and it feels really good in my bones and my body to be making both and using the leftovers in porridge and bread. It's like a cycle that feels just so whole and real. It's wonderful.
Sounds
Love
good.
it.
I love how you get all different.
How about your dinner?
Oh, sorry.
Oh no, you're good.
Go ahead.
I'm jumping in already.
This is just so much.
Go.
No, this
We
is.
want you to.
No,
We want you to.
I was just going to say, Alison, I love how you get all of the different, it's like you're extracting all these layers out of all of the food that you make and eat. And I just really appreciate that. It's just different levels and layers.
Thank you.
It's really fascinating.
Yeah, that's what's so deep about this beer, because it's not just beer. You know, there are these layers. There's the bread before, there's the bread afterwards, and then I found this porridge, which I don't know if anyone else is doing or whether it's just me who likes really sour porridge. But it feels so satisfying to be utilising everything to the nth degree in it, and then knowing that it's local grain and it's come from around here, it feels whole. It feels like real and right. That's a nice thing.
Wonderful.
Yeah, it's so completely broken down. You know, the grain at that point is just totally accessible, and I can't really imagine the difference between eating that and how little energy in your body needs to go into digesting that versus just getting, you know, a bag of oats and cooking it in 10 minutes in, you know, the morning for breakfast. And how much more of your energy would need to be shunted over to that process. It's just crazy. Okay.
So what did you have to?
Well, so I had dinner. I think it's so funny that we have all, you know, like the 3 meals.
3 meals.
So I had, let's see, what did I have? We had some ground beef from a friend, and then the sausage that Gary and I made a couple weeks ago. And then peppers and greens from the freezer from last summer. Getting to the bottom of that. Liver. I don't know if it was sheep or goat, because I just had like a cooler of them and I divided them into bags and froze them and wrote on the sheep or goat ? I can't tell them apart. So some liver whacked in, and then we made that into burritos or quesadillas or bowls. Just depends on what everybody wanted.
So were the peppers fresh before you put them in? Or
no, they were
had you cooked them
frozen.
previously?
They were frozen. We took...
But were they frozen fresh or were they frozen cooked?
Oh, right. No, they were frozen fresh. So all the peppers that we picked last summer, just kind of like bells and pimentos and things like that. And we just chopped them into big, kind of chunky dice and just filled bag after bag of them and froze them.
Do they freeze okay?
Oh yeah, they freeze fantastic.
Oh, I've never done that.
Yeah. Well, it was, I like having peppers to throw into, you know, stir fries and things like that. But I don't like it canned so much. So.
Right. Okay.
Let's see, we had that. And then I made like a rhubarb and apple pie filling. Well, I had some fresh rhubarb from a friend, and then some apple pie filling that I had canned last summer, and I just kind of heated that up on the stove together, and that was like a little dessert, so it was pretty tasty. That was dinner. It was delicious. And then we sat out at the campfire until way too late.
5 minutes ago.
Yeah. And I was like, I gotta go.
So let's hear what Elly had. What was your last meal, Elly? What did you have
Ellie's
for
lunch?
lunch?
Well, actually, I really want to tell you about my second last meal.
Ooh.
Yeah,
hear it.
well, can I tell
Let's
you?
hear
I'll
it.
be quick, but I'll tell you about 2 meals that I had today. This morning I had my fermented oats, which I've been eating every day now for the last 3 days since I started.
So good.
I've been starting my batches with leftovers from the day before. I don't know if that's okay to do, but it seems to be working, and I'm loving them. I just love it. It's amazing how much, I don't know whether it seems to be more creamy than usual. I'm just soaking them in water.
I agree.
And
way
I'm putting,
creamier.
way
That's my
creamier. I've never
experience.
done it before. I have fed my sourdough starter with oats before, and it loves it. You know, just for fun, I'd put different things in there from time to time, but I've never actually fermented a bowl of oats like that. So I've been having those, and they were great. But for lunch, I had...
And you told me,
yes.
Elly, I want to ask a question about the
Sure.
oats. You told me that they were kind of effervescent, and I wondered, are you putting a lid on the jar when you're fermenting them to kind of trap the bubbles in?
No, not at all. I can
and they're
just...
still effervescent.
I can
Wow.
just... I can just feel it. I can feel a little bit of effervescence and
I know
the
what you mean.
texture on my tongue. So, yeah, no, I'm not pressurising my oats.
Nice.
That would be interesting, though. But I have to find a really big jar with a really good lid for that.
I really think once you start fermenting the oats, you can't go back.
No, I don't think I can.
It's so good.
Yeah, and why would you want to when you discover something like that? I've fermented lots of things in my life, but I just never, I knew that there was more possibilities in terms of fermenting grain that I had done, but just kind of hadn't got there yet, really. And listening to your podcast has been so inspiring, and I thought, I'm just going to try this. So I got half a teaspoon of my sourdough starter out and just mixed it in with some water, just with some rolled oats, and left it overnight. And the first batch wasn't super sour, but I could taste it, and then what was left over from that I left for the rest of that day, and I ate it in the afternoon, and it was really lovely, and I could taste a little bit of the effervescence, as I said, and it had a really nice sour zing to it too, which was great. I think I put a little bit of honey with it. I can't remember now, but I've since had it with a bit of fruit and different things. Yeah, it was a really good combination. So yeah. But
and what about your lunch? Tell us about your lunch as well.
I had a really simple lunch, but very delicious. It's quite cold here, and I really feel the cold. I'm really sensitive to cold, which is probably good thing that I'm living in a subtropical climate. But it's not particularly cold weather by most people's standards. But yeah.
Okay, what's cold? What's cold to you?
Well, to me, it's only 23 degrees Celsius. Which is fairly warm. You'll have to convert that to Fahrenheit.
That's quite cold in my book as well.
Okay. All right, I'm laughing. I had to look it up because 23 Celsius is 73 Fahrenheit. And I'm laughing because this morning I was talking to one of our hip campers and it was 60 degrees out. And we were like, oh my word, it's so hot out today. This is ridiculous.
Oh, funny. Yeah.
And we were like, oh man, take off this jacket.
It's so funny. You do get used to different climates though, I guess.
No, it's true.
Yeah,
but
I got very, very acclimatized is the word, I think. I don't know how to say that. I got acclimatized to the warm weather in Virginia. And it took me a couple years to readjust when we got back here.
Yeah. So I had some soup for lunch. I had some split pea and veggie soup that I had. It's something I make all the time. And I had that with some beautiful spelt, 100% spelt sourdough bread. I had a few pieces of that.
Is that the one you said when I posted Caldo Verde on the Ancestral Kitchen podcast, and then you said, oh, I have a split pea soup that is 5 ingredients I make all the time. Was that this one?
That's the one. It's really simple.
What's your ingredients?
It's literally 1.5 to 2 cups of yellow split peas. You can use green split peas as well. I use 1 potato, 1 onion, 1 carrot, and 1 really nice ripe big tomato. And I put the whole lot in a pot with a whole heap of water. Growing up, we always had it with bacon bones or ham hocks, basically a pea and ham soup. But I'm a plant-based eater these days, so I actually put sometimes a little bit of liquid smoke in there to give it that sort of smoky flavour, and that's a really nice version, and that's how I make it. And I've been eating it my whole life. I really love it. It's probably my favourite food ever. So we have it all the time. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, one of those comfort foods are just wonderful. You just can go back and back and back to them,
and with
feel
a bit of
like you're coming home.
Exactly. And with a bit of salt added, it's incredible how just a few ingredients can make, if the ingredients is the right combination and they're the quality of what they are just shines through. It's simple things can be really, really delicious. So, the bread is a great example of that too. The spelt bread, it's just one grain.
Yeah.
It's one humble ancient grain, but the flavour is outstanding. So, yeah, I just like to find those things that I like, and I tend to eat a lot of similar things over and over again, but with a few variations here and there. But that was my lunch. Yeah.
That sounds lovely. Beautiful.
Yeah.
So let me explain to everyone listening how I first kind of came to know you, Elly, because we haven't done any introductions.
No, and I don't think I know this either.
There you go. So when I started baking sourdough, it was probably about 3.5 years ago, I used a forum which is called the Fresh Loaf to kind of do my research and get to know. And I started baking with the intention to be 100% whole grain. I wasn't interested in baking with white flours at all, and yet I'd never baked sourdough before. So and in addition, I wanted to use UK flour, so I was kind of going right in at the deep end. And this forum was amazing, and on there quite a lot of people are playing with your recipes, experimenting with your recipes, making your recipes. And on a post on there, I saw someone reference your 100% whole grain loaf recipe. So I went and watched your video, and it was one where the wheat is soaked with the water overnight, and then in the morning you come back and put in the sourdough starter. But you come back to the kind of the wheat and the water, or the spelt in my case, and the water already in some kind of dough consistency. And I discovered your YouTube channel through that and saw all your other videos. And then, I've been following you. And then when I went back on Instagram last year, we found each other on there because you opened your Instagram account.
Yeah.
And then since then, it's been wonderful to watch all your breads and also your soaps, because you have two channels. You have your Elly's Everyday Whole Grain Sourdough channel on YouTube and your Elly's Everyday Soap Making. So I watch all of those go around on my Instagram and get totally inspired, and have made several of your breads. And the last one, I think, was your hot cross buns. And I played with that and changed it a bit up and made those.
Yeah, wonderful.
So, for those who don't know Elly, go and check out her two YouTube channels. She's been making sourdough forever. And then I think in about 5 years ago, she did her first video, put it up on YouTube, and really it's become extremely successful. And how many followers do you have on your whole grain sourdough channel now?
Well, that's a really small channel. I've only just started that because I'm just focusing on the whole grain sourdough. Yeah, but my original channel, which is now been taken over completely by soap making, that has all of my original sourdough recipes still on it. But it's got about 130,000 at the moment, the last time I looked, roughly.
Yeah.
Wow. So
a lot of people are watching your videos and baking your breads, which must feel amazing.
Look, I honestly try not to think about it too much because I can't quite compute. Like, it's hard to imagine that number of people, but it's been a very humbling experience, and oh gosh, I don't quite know what to say about that. I get a bit shy about it, actually, but I do love it. I enjoy
wonderful.
it, and I'm really just trying to help people out. And I feel like when I first started, I was really I think a lot of newcomers just get bombarded by all the technicalities and in my view overly scientific approach to bread making, and this perfectionism that just isn't achievable for most people, and not everybody wants that either, so I
totally agree, and that's why I was attracted to you, because you've got such a kind of a joyful attitude, but you're not worried about having everything absolutely perfect. You care greatly about the flours that you're using, I can tell that, and you mill your own flour, and it's wonderful to see that. And you're focused on 100% whole grain, which is really interesting. But it's done in such a way that you're kind of open and easygoing, which demystifies what's behind sourdough, and focuses on making good, wholesome bread in a calm, joyful way, rather than making everything perfect, which is why I really liked and kind of stuck by what you were doing, because that's a style I really appreciate.
Thanks,
I think
Alison.
a lot of people do.
Yeah, that's really what I'm trying to achieve. Really, I feel like I'm just really sharing my experience. I do get so many questions and contact behind the scenes, people asking me questions. People really do want to get started, and I feel like if there's one person that I can help to get over that boundary of, I just can't get my head around sourdough, then, if a video that I've got that says, oh, you can do it this way or you can do it that way, it doesn't really matter, you'll work it out. If that encourages people to break down those barriers and get going with it, then I'm happy. That's good. Yep.
Excellent. So how did you get into sourdough, first of all? What's your history with it?
It's interesting. I've been thinking about this question, and I guess the answer is really twofold. It started off for me probably like things do for many people, firstly as an idea, something that I was exposed to a long time ago, but didn't actually start really playing around with until much later. But I've been baking my own breads for nearly 20 years now, since sometime in the 90s, the late 90s, showing my age. The very first bread book I ever bought was a book called The Natural Tucker Bread Book, tucker being an Australian colloquial term for food. So Natural Tucker Bread Book by John Downes. And John Downes is really the pioneer of sourdough baking in Australia. He had the first sourdough bakery in Melbourne that was started in the 70s, I think, and really got things going here. But in this book I bought, the whole book I have to thank for me falling in love with bread making altogether, even though I had always had an interest in baking and cooking my whole life. But I found this book and I realised quite quickly that half of the book was dedicated to breads made with a leaven. And there was no mention of the word sourdough or anything like that, but these naturally leavened breads. So I kind of learnt about, sourdough starters and that kind of wild yeast risen breads through that book. But when I first started baking, I just thought, it's just a bit too much for me. I don't know if I'm into it. And nobody else that I knew of was doing it or had even heard of it back then here. So I just proceeded with making my yeast breads mostly with whole grain flours, and then I experimented with using really small amounts of yeast from the Jim Lay kind of tradition that he learnt from Italy, actually. So fermenting his breads over a much longer period of time using just a pinch of yeast. So I started as I learnt more and more and more, I eventually got back into sourdough, and I think it was around 2009 when I really gave it a serious crack and finally got my starter going. I had some attempts before that, but my starters languished in the back of the fridge and died of mold, sadly, because I just didn't have the confidence. I didn't have an understanding of it that I was happy with, so I didn't really know what I was doing, and I really had to do more learning and figure it out for myself. But once I did that, I was off. So it's been 2009, I think, since I started with sourdough, but baking bread generally a lot longer than that.
That's really inspiring to hear you say I didn't know what I was doing.
No.
Because I think that's true of anyone on
I
any
still don't know
learning
what I'm
curve,
doing.
At the beginning, you never know what you're doing. But you do.
Oh,
you do now.
no.
And you're sharing all this wonderful stuff.
Yeah.
And there was a point where you didn't know what you were doing.
No.
And that's just a wonderful example of how we
Absolutely.
learn.
And I remember
everyone
you
has to go
talking
through
in
that.
one of the previous episodes, Alison, I think might have been the introductory one, where you're talking about your curiosity, and I really could relate to that because I love the idea of sourdough. I understood that it was a better way to consume bread. It was healthier. It was more digestible for everybody, particularly people who had gluten sensitivities and things like that, which I didn't, but that just appealed to me. I thought, if I can make a bread that most people can eat and tolerate well, then that's got to be a good thing. and it's better for me too. It just appealed to me on so many levels. So, yeah, I really wanted to understand it. And I think if you it is more challenging, sourdough bread making. I don't think anyone finds it really easy, especially at the beginning. There is a bit of a learning curve, but if you decide that you want to do it and you take a little bit of time to have a bit of a dive into it, and hopefully stumble across some teachers who can show you some shortcuts and demystify all those myths that are out there, then you can get going with it pretty easily. Yeah.
Okay. Andrea, do you have a question for Elly?
How many can I ask? I have so many questions.
Or we've got to kind of share them out because we were both desperate to ask
I know.
questions.
Well, I do have one question actually that wasn't on the list of questions that Allison was coming up with. But I wanted to ask, because this is something that I get asked a lot and I get pictures texted to me a lot. And you talked about your starter languishing in the fridge, which probably a lot of us who make sourdough can say, yep, that that has happened.
Yes.
But when you have a healthy sourdough start on your counter, can you tell us what it looks like?
Ooh. Yeah. My criteria for a healthy sourdough starter is that it smells good. You know, I think the nose knows if it smells off.
Yeah.
It probably is off. You know, if it smells really funky, sometimes they can get funny different aromas to them. I've had my starter that smelled a bit like bananas at times, or different fruits and things like that, and that's totally okay. But if it smells bad, it's probably not good. So that's the first thing. I would have a bit of a sniff. If there's visible mold on the top, and I do talk about mold a fair bit because it's very relevant to where I live. You know, in the subtropics, we do have really hot, humid summers, and you do have to store things differently here. So yeah, if you've got, you know, calm yeast, the really thin kind of layer of white powdery mold that you can get on the top of some ferments, sometimes starters will develop that. That's not necessarily an issue. You could probably scrape that off and then, you know, maybe discard the rest of the starter or use it for crepes or compost it or something, and refeed it, and it'll probably be okay. If you've got mold, you know, like black mold or really yucky mold, that's not necessarily something that you can't recover from, but it's a sign of neglect, really. If your starter is healthy, it's going to just look like bubbly batter of flour and water, which is what it is.
Right.
Yeah, it's usually they should really smell that, like that combination of sourness, a bit of tartness and acidity in the smell, but also you should be able to smell a yeasty smell as well, because it really is this symbiotic, the culture is a symbiotic relationship between lactic acid bacterias and some acetic acids as well, and yeasts, you know, wild yeasts off the flour that it's grown in. So you should be able to smell some yeasts as well. But if you're keeping your sourdough starter on the counter, do people store, like, just keep their starters out in room temperature where you are, Andrea? Or is that more common? Or do they use the fridge?
Everybody that I know keeps theirs on the counter.
Right. Yeah, and I think I've heard a lot about that, and that seems to be have a really it's a really common way of keeping it in, you know, the American tradition, and you guys have such a rich history with sourdough that Australia doesn't have. We're developing it, but I think a lot of that is climate dependent, and if you're using your starter frequently, I would say if you live in a reasonably cool climate and you're using it regularly, you can keep it on the bench, on the counter. We just say the bench here. You can just keep it on the bench and it'll be fine, because you're going to refresh it every couple of days. You know, if you've got family and you're making bread quite frequently, I can't see why anything would go wrong with it. It should be able to last a couple of days. But if it's if it's smelling really, really super sour or it's smelling a bit off, it's probably a sign that it needs to be used or refreshed more frequently. And if that's not possible, I'd consider storing it in the fridge, using a fridge maintenance method, which I use. I just couldn't keep my starter on the bench here in summer. It's too hot. It would just go off.
I keep mine in the fridge. I think it's a similar thing, especially in the summer. It's not possible for me.
Yeah.
No, yeah.
Mm.
Our house never gets that warm in the summer, so it should be fine.
Mm.
Do you think, Elly, that sorry, do you want to, Andrea?
No, go. I was going to change the subject, so carry on.
Yeah, I wanted to just kind of pull on the sourdough starter a little bit and say that I know that a lot of questions that get put to sourdough bakers are about starters, because I've had loads of them myself. I know that, you've helped a lot of people and you have a lot of people baking your breads. Do you think it's the starters that stop people from baking their own sourdough, or is there something else in your experience that stops people from baking their own sourdough? And how can we solve that? Because I want the world to be baking sourdough.
Me too.
So what's your thoughts?
Alison is on a mission, Elly. We have to help.
We share this mission. Yes, absolutely. I think it's two things. I think, yes, it is the starter and maintaining it and managing it and knowing what to do with it. That's one part of it, but I also think it's actually baking the bread. There are some really key, fairly simple concepts and understandings of important processes that you do need to know to be able to get it to work. And I think it's the same with the starters. Obviously, there's a fermentation process going on here that includes acids as a byproduct of the fermentation, which regular commercial yeast risen breads don't have. So you can put a bowl of dough on the bench that is just got some commercial yeast in it, and you can put a bowl of dough that is fermented with sourdough, exactly the same quantities side by side. The yeast one will ferment and get bubbly and do its thing and get really yeasty, but you could come back 2 days later and still make a loaf of bread out of that dough. The sourdough one, you couldn't. Because of the acids in sourdough, there is a point where it just goes too far and it completely breaks down. So it literally, everything falls apart. It loses its stretch. The gluten breaks down. So I think, people, like I said before, the understanding the sourdough starter and kind of getting that right and knowing what it should look like when it's ready to bake and all that sort of stuff is hard, but actually...
And do you think that just comes from experience, or are there things that you would say to people to help them get over those two things?
Yeah, part of it comes down to experience, but part of it just is about knowing what to look for too. I think... on a really basic level, your sourdough starter, when you feed it, you're mixing in fresh flour and water to feed it up after you've used it, hopefully. I usually just have a small amount left in the bottom of my jar. I don't feed, I don't have a great big ton of it that I then add more flour to. I usually make sure I've only got a little bit left over and feed that with lots more fresh flour and water. And then basically stirring it up and waiting for it to repopulate with that culture. So you want to see it getting bubbly. If it's bubbly and active, whether it's thick or thin, it doesn't matter what consistency it is. It doesn't matter how high hydration it has, there's different rules about how much water and flour you should feed it. It doesn't matter. As long as it's active, really, it's going to raise a loaf of bread. But if you leave it for too long, you got to know, like I said before, that with the sourdough culture, it has acids in it as well as yeasts, and acids break down the structures that hold bread up. So if your sourdough starter has gone too far, it's going to make your bread really acidic. And if you're using a lot of sourdough starter in your bread, that's a whole lot of piece of your bread then that is fairly broken down, so it will change the structure of the bread. Does that help? Does that make sense? Yeah,
Yeah,
but really
it does,
just
certainly,
making
thank
sure
you.
it's active and knowing what to look out for. But most people, I think, once they find their groove with it, it's usually because they found some method that makes sense to them, that's not too much work. And once they've got that, they're fine. But there's infinitely
I
many.
think that's an important point, not too much work, because people kind of, you can put it in the fridge and you forget about it, and that's it, and you get on with your life. And it has to be a rhythm that you can incorporate into your days and not be too much work, because otherwise you're just not going to do it. So it's finding that rhythm.
I don't know if you've noticed, but on a lot of my posts, I will actually say I used half a cup of starter straight from the fridge, 5 days old. And I put that in there on purpose because there's all this so-called rules out there about your starter must be fresh, must be fed 3 hours before you bake bread or whatever. It doesn't need to be. As long as the starter was really active and really healthy when you put it in the fridge, it's going to maintain the yeast and the culture in that well enough to be able to raise a loaf after 5 days in the fridge. It's going to do a fine job. So I don't advocate for, waking your starter up again and going through this whole big process before you make bread. You can do that if you want, and you might make slightly better bread. But for me, my bread making methods were developed at a time when I was working full time in really, difficult jobs, and I needed it to be a no-brainer. I just needed it to be easy, and I didn't want to have to plan out my whole week around my bread making. So my starter just sits in. I'll tell you briefly my method. I have, say, about 2/3 of a cup of starter that sits in the fridge. When I want to make a loaf of bread, I take it out. I use however much I want in my bread, usually most of what I've got in there. Mix up my bread, and then the bread ferments and I make the bread. And after I've taken the starter out of the jar and put that in with my bread dough, what's left in the jar, it's usually a teaspoon or two, not much at all. I refeed that. I feed that up with new flour and new water and mix it up. I usually let it rise again alongside the bread, so I'll often have my bowl of bread dough sitting on the bench, and I'll have my little starter jar, and a few hours later, or once I can see that it's starting to get bubbly again, I put it back in the fridge, and that's where it stays till the next time I'm ready to make bread.
So do you never make a separate leaven for your recipes at all?
Oh, rarely.
Wow.
Sometimes.
Wow.
Yeah. Sometimes. I love the freedom of being able to go, I just want to mix up a loaf of bread.
I want to do it today.
Yeah, I love that.
Yeah. So that's the way. And I actually think that method, that really kind of low-key method of managing a sourdough starter, I really think that's how my YouTube channel and that very first video that I did, I really think that that's one of the reasons why the whole thing took off, because it was new. People going, you don't have to make a leaven, you don't have to refeed it, you don't have to get it to this.
That's liberating.
Yeah, it really is. And it makes sense, because really it's the same with other ferments. It's the same as sauerkraut. Once it's fermented, you put it in the fridge, and you could use that to inoculate another batch, but those cultures stay alive. They just go into hibernation. So you can just pull that out, and especially in summer, I think it makes a lot of sense to use cold starter straight from the fridge. I don't even warm it up. I literally just take it straight out, put it straight in the bread dough. And when you're milling your own grain as well, which I do, the flour is often warm from the mill. It's not super hot, but it's a bit warm from the mill. So using cold starter, and sometimes I even use cold water as well, that helps to balance out the temperature of the dough, because you don't want really warm dough, because the warmer your dough is, the more chance you may have of over fermenting it, which is probably one of the biggest problems with sourdough. So that very easy method allows people get really excited about it, unless you really are looking for, super pro baker standard breads with these giant big glossy open crumb. But if you're an everyday, and that's the whole thing behind Elly's Everyday, I guess it's really just everyday ways of doing things that are easy to do around whatever kind of lifestyle or schedule that you have, because most of us, we don't bake bread full time and do it for a living. We do it because we want to eat and we want to feed our children or whatever the case may be. Yeah. So, yeah.
I know there's a lot of moms listening. I know because they're all my friends.
Yeah. Oh,
and we talk about the podcast, and so we talk about everything that we're talking about on here. And really, I've had a bunch of people message me, Allison, after we did the 5, cheap things you can make at home. And a lot of people said, oh, the water kefir just sounds so easy, And so I think there's a lot of things where we would do it if the method were not so daunting.
Yes.
And I think if somebody wants to do what you said of, a fancy 14-step glossy open crumb, loaf, then
which is lovely, but
start with this, make bread every day. And I think there's a lot of things that people would do if we didn't feel like it was so intimidating. And Allison and I also talk a lot about how this is how people ate to survive.
Exactly.
And they weren't trying to post, the Instagram picture. They were like, I have 12 children and they want food.
Exactly.
So, this is fantastic.
And I think, as well as that too, you can actually make really, really good breads using simple methods too.
Yeah. Oh, not even joking. Not even joking. And your simplest recipe, as you're saying, I say simple in quotes, your simplest recipe is once again going to exceed that expensive loaf that you buy at a store, just because of the sheer fact of how the quality of the ingredients and the process and the literal freshness. I mean, where else can you get bread that's 5 minutes old?
Yeah, exactly.
And it's kind of, this thing's all about trends, there's a trend at the moment for the open crumb. Sort of tartine style bread.
You're right.
And, people are chasing that because they're chasing a kind of a desire and a look. But the truth is, like you said, you can make really good bread in a way that doesn't look anything like that.
Right.
And it's easy.
Yeah.
And if we, as a community, want people to move towards creating their own food and caring about where their grains come from and eating sourdough, not store-bought bread, then the way that we can do that is what you're doing, which is share the simplest method that even people, like you say, who are working 9 to 5, like you were, can build it into their life. And then that becomes part of them. And they've moved a step forward towards living the way that they want to, which is wonderful.
Exactly.
Freedom.
Yeah. And once you know, like I said, there is that little bit of a learning curve with sourdough, but once you know what you're looking for and you learn that basic knowledge and you develop a little bit of skill in some dough handling stuff, and you understand the factors of temperature and time and how to manipulate them to suit your schedule, you can make awesome sourdough any day of the week. There's so many different cheats and tricks and shortcuts. It's incredible. Actually, I love it. I'm endless. I actually never make the same thing with the same method twice because I'm always just trying out new things, but there's always an easier way to do it. So it can be done. Absolutely.
Amen to that. Wow. So what's the bread you make the most, Elly? And would you share with us the kind of process and the details around it?
Yes, well, I saw this question on the list, and I have to say, in all honesty, there isn't one. There really isn't.
Because you change it each time.
I don't use recipes. I never have. I use recipes, but I make them up as I go, and I share recipes.
I know that feeling.
I share, like all of the recipes that I share with other people is really for the benefit of people who do want a bit more guidance and they want a recipe because they're still learning or whatever. But I honestly don't think I ever make the same bread twice. It's never the same. I either change the process because I'm doing something different on that day. I'm putting my dough in my cooler with an ice brick because it's really hot and I have to go out, or I'm sticking it in a big roaster with a mug of boiling water because I'm in a hurry and it's cold and I want it to hurry up. Or I'm using different flours all the time. I have the whole cabinet under my bench where my mill is. I'm milling my own grains. So I literally just look in there and go, what am I going to have? So I just make them up. But I guess I could say some of my regulars would be... I do use my sort of basic grains that I use, that I mill, would be probably organic whole wheat. I use a fair amount of, mainly because historically that's all you've really been able to get in Australia for a long time. And there is some really lovely wheat grown here in Queensland, so I do like to try and use that a bit. But lately I've been getting some really beautiful spelt, so I've been using that a lot more. So spelt is wonderful. So I will often do 100% wheat loaves with either plain or with seeds added, or I might put in a bit of spelt, or I might put in a bit of rye. I love sort of Scandinavian style rye breads. I have made a lot of them over the years. I haven't made one for a little while. I'm probably due for another one, but they are so easy to make. So they're a really good hands-off recipe to make. You just mix it up, leave it, and then later on in the day put it in a tin, raise it and bake it. So you don't have to worry about gluten development with a rye bread because there isn't much. They're really easy. So yeah, any kind of combination. The base flours, like I said, are usually wheat, spelt or rye, but I also have barley, and I play around with a whole lot of other things in my blends as well, which is the milling is so handy. You can try all sorts of ingredients. I've made breads with millet and sorghum and teff and even brown rice and all sorts of things in them. So I just basically make up whatever I feel like on any given day.
Tell us a little bit more about the milling, because I know you do all of your flour is milled. Explain how that works and what you use.
How that works, it's basically I have a benchtop stone mill. There's a whole lot on the market. But the one that I have is designed by a man called Wolfgang Mock in Germany, and he's been designing these stone benchtop mills for a long time. So I have a little Mock mill, and basically it's got a hopper on the top, and you turn it on, pour the grain in the top, and it's got a little lever on the side where you can adjust the grind. It's basically just got two stones inside with a hole in the middle, and the grain goes into the hole and then is sort of fed out in between the stones, and the coarseness of the flour depends on how far apart the stones are. So you just adjust it depending on whether or not you want coarse flour or fine flour, and you stick a bowl under it and it comes out.
That's so cool.
Yeah, it is very cool.
It's literally stones? Like it's literally stones.
Well, they're not I think it's a natural stone material, but it's like a composite that is manufactured stone. Yeah.
I mean, I can imagine because they'd have to make it the exact shape. But
yeah.
Oh, wow.
I think it's canal.
Well, Alison, we can
why do you do this?
Stop grinding it by hand in our little stone grinder.
Yeah, with our two stones outside in the backyard.
I've got
the way we've been doing it.
I want to know.
You totally can.
You
can buy
why
stone mills. India, they use a lot in Indian households.
No, I don't. I don't want to buy one.
You've got other things you want to do other than grind flour.
Yeah. Get one that you can plug in. They're great.
Can you tell us why you mill? Why you don't buy flour?
It's a good question. I made a decision a few years back that I really just wanted to eat as much whole foods as I could, including whole grain flours in my bread making. And at the time I was quite involved with the sourdough baking community in Australia, and there's a man called Chris Stafferton in Tasmania. I hope he listens to this. Hi, Chris. Who is he only makes gluten-free sourdough, but he is a wizard with that stuff, and he can make sourdough bread with
hold on.
Yeah. Gluten-free.
Gluten-free sourdough.
Yes.
And I know I have had a lot of people ask me, and I'd say it, I know it's possible. Can you say his name again?
His name is Chris Stafferton. He is in Devonport in Tasmania. He has a book that he released a couple of years ago called Promise and Fulfillment. Real breads made without gluten. He's the guru of gluten-free sourdough, but here's the rub. He uses all whole grains, so he's not using these funny gluten-free flour mixes that are all full of gums and God knows what. Yeah. He is a miller as well. He was one of the people that influenced me to get into home milling, because I saw this man making these amazing breads with millet and sorghum and teff and brown rice and all these things, and I thought, wow, imagine what kind of breads I could make, even wheat-based breads, but with all these other things added in. And I just the freedom and the fun and the flexibility and the creativity that posed for me was irresistible. So I had to get a mill. And even though I don't have a need to eat gluten-free bread, I love the idea of using a whole variety of grains in my bread making. And I guess really the other part of the answer to that is freshness. If you have if you've baked bread or anything really with freshly milled flour, you will know that it is a really different thing. I was trying to think of an analogy for it, and the only thing I thought of is it's like if you cut an apple. If you make a fruit salad and you cut up your apples and you cut up your oranges or whatever, and you leave them sitting on a bowl in a bench for a day, they'll still be edible at the end of the day, and they'll probably still taste pretty good, but they'll be a little bit wilted and they'll be a bit oxidized, and they're just, they're not, you just can't get them, they're just not going to be the same as if it was as when you just cut it. So it's the same thing with flour, I think. And I certainly, I have a absolute appreciation that not everybody's going to have access to milling their own grains, and it's not going to be a possibility for loads of people, and totally want to support those people in whatever they want to do and whatever they're able to do as well. And any bread or anything that you can make with, make in your own kitchen with whatever flours you can get, regardless of what they are, is still going to be better than stuff made in a factory.
True.
But if you can, I was quite blown away by it. Freshly milled whole wheat and sort of gluten-y type grains like wheat and spelt and the ancient wheats, they have a real funny kind of gelatinous quality to them when you add the water to it. They just, I don't know, they smell different, they look different, they feel different. I think the pre-milled flours feel to me drier in comparison, like some of the moisture has come out of them. They feel a bit drier, which makes sense. I think they perform similarly as long as your store-bought whole grain flours are reasonably fresh. I know that there are grain growers in Australia who sell whole grain, but they also sell flour as well, and they tell their customers you must store it properly, especially in Australia, and use it within 6 weeks, because it's, especially if it's stone milled, it has the whole grain in the flour, so including the germ and the oily part, and if that is, if that's going to get too old, it's going to be prone to rancidity, and it's just not going to have the life. John Downes, that fellow who wrote the book that I talked about in the beginning, I actually came across him at a conferencey type grains gathering thing I went to down in Victoria a couple of years ago.
How exciting.
I know. I was, I don't know if I was the only one from Brisbane, but you could probably tell by the way I was dressed. I was so excited to be there. But I was so nervous. I didn't have the guts to go up and introduce myself to him, which I regret. But I've since chatted to him online. But I overheard him talking about the life force of freshly milled grain. And I thought, he knows. It really does have a life force to it. Just like the apple that is freshly cut compared to the apple that's been cut up into little bits and sat on the bench all day. It's just got a different energy to it, you know. It's fresher.
It sounds so nerdy to say, but I totally agree with you. And Alison, I was just commenting something about this on Erin's Instagram the other day, that with the food that, you know, comes out of your garden, or these fresh grains that you're talking about, Elly, they just feel so,
They're
I don't know, like there's a vibration to them or something really, I don't know what the right word is to say, but they just feel so alive, and there's like a current through them, and when you cook them, you just feel so excited and happy. And then when you get these packages, you know, styrofoam and plastic from the store, and you're peeling it apart, and your dead food is falling out, and you're like, this just isn't the same. It's just not.
And it sounds like an esoteric kind of a thing to say, but it isn't. It's well, it could be, and that's okay if that's your perspective, but it's pure science too. It's oxidization and all of these processes that take place
the frequencies.
When fresh ingredients aren't fresh anymore, everything degrades and deteriorates over time.
Nutrients degrade.
So,
I remember a farmer telling me in Virginia, he was saying broccoli. I wish I could remember exactly what he said, and I don't know what his source was, but he was saying, a study found that broccoli, after one day, the nutrient values just have plummeted so low. And then after 3 days, it's like, why would you even eat it? And he was saying, rarely is anything in the grocery store, you're not finding something that was picked 12 hours ago.
No.
And my sister and I, when we were working on that farm, we got so stuck up about our produce because you just really get used to it. And we would take some kale out of the fridge and we'd say, "Oh, this is from yesterday. We can't eat it." And then we'd look at each other and just laugh about how picky we had gotten. But you can really tell.
Yeah, we don't all have the luxury of having everything super fresh, and I eat vegetables that have been in my fridge for God knows how long, all the time.
And it's been winter here. Everything I have is jarred or frozen or something. It's just like But
but I think if you love bread and you develop a real passion for home baking, and you're interested in where food comes from and varieties of grains, then the home milling is a lot of fun. It just takes it to another level, I guess.
My mom had carry on.
No, you go, Andrew.
I was just gonna say also, if anybody's wondering about the fresh milled things, then my mom had a grain mill. Well, she still has it, but she would grind the wheat for our bread when I was a kid, and then she would store it in the freezer. Not for a really long time, maybe a week or so. When you have 8 kids,
that's a great way to do it.
Pretty fast. But the flavor was really good. Of course, we were just, it was just what Mom did, so we didn't think it was that unique. But a friend of mine said to me the other day, I can't remember, who were you that said this to me? If you hear this, please tell me. I can't remember who it was. But they said, we ground some grain for our bread the other day, and I thought you all were kind of going on a little bit about how much better it tastes. But she said, I could not believe that the flavor was completely different. It wasn't even the same thing. And she was just so blown away.
Wow.
So if anybody's wondering, yes, you can really tell the difference.
Yeah. You still make really awesome bread if it's not freshly milled, but it is a bit, definitely, you can notice it.
My rye is all pre-ground, and most of my einkorn is usually pre-ground. So I'm not saying I'm always using the fresh ground stuff.
And the other thing too is with fresh ground, if you're doing it yourself, you know that you're getting the whole grain in there, because you can buy whole grain flours here in Australia that say that they're the whole grain, but they're actually sifted a bit, and they do sometimes they do process them a little bit. I found that out, so at least you know what you're getting. Yeah.
I've got my eye on the clock here, girls, and I think that probably we're going to have to get you back for another episode, because we could just talk forever. There's one other big kind of topic in your life that I want to touch on before we finish, for sure, because I know, aside from all the bread stuff, you make your own soap, and you've got Elly's everyday soap making channel as well. And I remember a few weeks ago we were talking about soap, and you were saying you were thinking of it from an ancestral context. And what you said to me really inspired me and made me think about soap differently. I wonder if you would share that with
Can you remind me what I said to you?
About your soap.
No.
You were saying about how your nan used to use the same soap for everything. She had this one bar, and just how I just looked at all the things in the supermarket, all these different soaps we have, and thought, hang on, there's something wrong here.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh gosh, yes. I think about soap making. When I first discovered soap making, I really fell in love with the history of it, and I found some videos of Aleppo soap being made in these basement level buildings in Aleppo, and sadly a lot of those soap factories are gone now, but it's just incredible. There are these really rich traditions of soap making all around the world, and they're usually, well, then nearly always, and this isn't surprising, it certainly won't be surprising to you two, but they're always made, soaps in different places in the world are made with fats and oils that are accessible in that locality. So in a lot of areas in the Middle East and in Spain and different areas in Europe, olive oils and lots of plant oils, particularly olive, is a really rich tradition of olive oil soap making in lots of places. In America, there's this lots more people using making really beautiful soaps using animal fats, lard and beef tallow, and there's a real tradition of that, certainly commercially here in Australia as well, because beef is one of our biggest exports, so there must be lots of companies using the fat from, I don't know, hang on. Don't know what I'm talking about here. I'm mixing up live exports between just export of meat. But there's a lot of tallow soap made here. In a lot of South Asian countries, there's loads of coconut oil soap and palm oil soap. And setting aside the ecological issues with palm oil. But there are traditions and histories associated with why certain countries use those oils. So I was thinking about soap making from that perspective, and I've nearly always based a lot of my soap recipes on olive oil, because it just so happens that it makes a very gentle soap, and for my skin it likes it. It's the fatty acid profile of olive oil soap is really complementary, and it's a really common base oil for that reason. But yeah, in other countries, I was talking to a friend of mine who's also a soap maker, saying I'm really not so focused on sharing my recipes. I'm really much more focused on helping people to get the understanding and skills to be able to work out their own recipes, because my audience is really diverse and quite global, and I have actually my number one country where my audience is at the moment is in India. So I have lots, and I've been to India and I have a real connection with India, so that kind of makes sense. But olive oil is really expensive there, whereas there are people there who've been in contact with me who they're granddad had a coconut farm. So their family make their own coconut oil. So coconut oil soap recipe is going to be really suitable for them. So I try and do as much of a diversity as I can of different approaches and show people. And I often say in my videos, you don't have to use my recipe. This is just, I'm showing you this technique with this ingredient, but you could use another recipe depending on what oil you can get. And I try and encourage people to think about where the oils come from and why, they all have different properties, and some oils, like coconut oil soap, can be really drying, but there are tricks that you can use to make it less drying. So yeah, just trying to work around all those things so that people can have this nice balance between making their own soap and having their own homemade product with no packaging and, just made with their own local ingredients if possible.
It's a whole nother world, just like the sourdough bread is.
It really is.
Just like there are shelves of fluffed up white bread in packages on the supermarket shelves, there are all these soaps with ingredients that have really dubious provenance and that our skin soaks up just like we're eating them, and with plastic all around them that ends up in the ocean. And it's a whole other world of making soap.
Yeah, and I know we're running out of time, but so if the thing with my grandmother, like, we don't have to look too far back to see women and men in our families doing things quite differently. Since the Industrial Revolution, it's not that long ago that things changed really quite dramatically, and now we're in this land of buying stuff off a supermarket shelf. I don't make everything myself. I shop at a supermarket, but if there are a couple of really basic everyday type things, like for me it's soap and bread, there's a whole lot of other stuff I do too, but I don't have time to, those are just the ones that I focus on, then that's a good start,
Yeah, I agree. So if people want to start with the soap, because I know I'd love to give it a go, where would you point them?
Yeah, I would first get them to think about where they are and what oils. So you need oil to make soap, basically, and what oils can they get that are accessible to them in their part of the world and affordable, and if they can afford to buy locally produced oils or sourced oils or fats, then even better. And not everybody would want to do this, but I actually think the best way to start making soap is to learn how to calculate your own soap recipe. Soap making is a bit of a serious craft. It does require some pre-learning. You do have to handle caustic soda, and it's quite a dangerous substance. So I've got videos on nearly all of these subjects on my channel, but I would be looking at learning the basic process and understanding how soap is made, and then thinking about what kind of oil you want to use, and learning, it's not that hard to do, but learning how to calculate your own, formulate a recipe, and just finding a simple recipe that fits a mold that you've got and fits the type of oil that you can get, and just start simple. Yeah.
Wonderful. So that kind of leads us on to letting us know and let everyone listening know where we can find your videos for the bread, and where we can find you, where you hang out online.
Oh, great. Well, it is a little bit confusing, I admit, but unfortunately I had to split my YouTube channel into two, because they are two really different niche subjects, and YouTube algorithm really likes specificity. So I used to have my sourdough, all of my original sourdough bread videos are on the same channel that is now Elly's Everyday Soap Making on YouTube. So it's mostly soap stuff there, but there is still some sourdough. And I now have, for the whole grain only sourdough bread making, I have a channel, Elly's Everyday Whole Grain Sourdough, and it's a very small little channel, but I'm very dedicated to it. I'll just keep adding things there. So if you're into the whole grain sourdough, that's the place to go to.
And you're in Instagram?
And I'm Instagram
and
Facebook as well? Yeah, just Elly's Everyday at both of those places. And I'm just
Wonderful.
very close to being finished building my website, which will be ellyseveryday.com. I'm about a week or two off, so very soon. People, I know. Yeah, that would be really good. So soon, and that will be really my home on the internet after that. I'm really looking forward to having a bit of freedom from social media platforms and having my own place. So that's really going to be a resource hub and lots of info there. So
that will probably be up then by the time this episode goes out.
Great. Okay. Yeah. I'll certainly be letting everybody know.
Andrea, do you have any more questions for Elly before we let her go?
When are we recording the next one? This was so exciting, and it just feels so good.
Thank you.
I jokingly call it flour kraut.
I love that.
But I love learning about sauerkraut and sourdough, and this is just feels so freeing. And for everybody who just wants more of you, which I know we all do, your YouTube channel is amazing. So everybody can just go indulge. Now that the episode is almost over, you can just go straight over to YouTube and binge on Elly videos.
Yeah, they're all the subjects, all the basic subjects on both soap and sourdough. They're all covered there. Like, I've really just tried to tick off all those things that people want to know. So you can go to the playlist.
The titles are so clear. It's everything is so straightforward. That's why you have hundreds of thousands of views, because they're really good. And I can't wait to do that. I'm excited too. Like Allison was saying about the soap, I'm so excited about that because I do have quite a lot of tallow and lard, being American. Yeah. So I'm that tallow. Exact person you talked about.
Yeah, that's great. I've got a good friend who I helped make her first soap using tallow that she rendered herself recently. And she was like, "Oh, can you make tallow soap?" And I went, "I can teach you and we can do it together." And guess what? Tallow soap is one of the best soaps in terms of the way that its qualities, it's lasting, it's lather, all that stuff. It's a really good gentle soap too. Yeah, that's really good.
I really wish we could just get together in a kitchen and make some bread and make some soap and then sit down and eat together. That would be nice. Elly, is there anything else that you want to share?
I don't think I want to share anything else other than just my huge thanks and appreciation to you two for inviting me on the podcast. It's been really fun.
Thank you, Elly.
And thanks for what you're doing too. I think it's really exciting. I've been listening to the episodes and really enjoying it. Learning a lot, and I think it's just wonderful what you're doing, sharing what you know with other people. It takes some dedication to do that, but I think it's so important to present alternatives and help people learn these skills. So congratulations, you're doing a great job.
And you too, you're doing the same.
Thank you. Yeah,
we're all doing what we believe in.
Thanks.
Thank you ever so much for being with us.
My pleasure.
Our, my morning haze and Andrea's nighttime haze. And you're beautifully there with your birds. I did hear them slightly in the background, which was beautiful.
Gosh, beautiful.
I hope they're not too loud.
No, we love it.
And I hope everyone's enjoyed the episode. And hopefully in the future we'll have you back. But for now, we will say
lovely.
Ciao.
Great.
Thank you
very
much.
Thank you, Elly.
Bye, Alison. Bye, Andrea.
Bye. Bye. Thank you so much for listening. We'd love to continue the conversation. Come find us on Instagram. Andrea's at Farm and Hearth and Alison's at Ancestral_Kitchen. Until next time, we both wish you much fun, exploration and satisfaction in and out of the kitchen.